And I thought that was a moment when the country had to assess what Robinson was doing. Because it was a moment that he had missed. Right? Parliament is, in the West Indian tradition, Parliament is supreme. And in fact, all parliamentary systems. In the West Indian tradition, the way the supremacy of Parliament is asserted is by withholding supply. That is the West Indian tradition. Withhold supply. You don't give him any money. You know that, Vinsha? Do you know? Right. The West Indian political system was founded that way. You know, they bring a governor here in the English-speaking Caribbean. They bring a governor, and he was the lawmaker, he was the administrator, and he was the judge. But the only thing he had to do, he had to get the money himself. He didn't. The crown never used to pay him. The planters pay him, and the planters force him to do their bidding, to become an expression of their will by withholding supply. And that system evolved rapidly in the West Indies here, under a condition in which there was revolution in England, and think about popular government and representative government and so on. It evolved rapidly, in which the governor became no more than a monarch, expressing the will of the parliament telling him what to do and so on and so on. Of course, the representatives of the parliament were the planter class and not the black population. And I think that is why we have not really honor that tradition in our history and so on, and speak about that tradition as we should, because the slave was outside of it, and in the atmosphere of nationalism and so on. We don't talk about it, but it's a legacy that we could ignore at great peril. And Robinson had a chance to invoke that legacy, because what Robinson was trying to do all the time is to set limits on the exercise of executive power. All the prime ministers, including Robinson, in the country has been rampant. There is no limit to what they can do. And if you read the papers every day now, everybody's saying these fellows are behaving as God. Read the thing on Bagatelle, and where they're breaking out, everybody's saying these men are behaving like gods, doing whatever they want. And that's what we've been having. And you need some agency to put limits on the exercise of executive power, authority, and so on. And Robinson, in my mind, when I reassess Robinson's presidency, he attempted to convert the presidency into an agency for limiting the exercise of executive authority. And so people look to him to rein in the Ronald prime minister and so on. And the one chance he had to do it, he let it slip. He let it slip. He failed to do it. The real chance he had wasn't in this delay. This delay mechanism, really, in my own view, is a flagrant violation of the spirit of the Constitution. You can't have a president behaving that way. And the real mechanism he should have employed was the one that draws on the tradition of West Indian politics and government here, in which the parliament is supreme. If you can't pass the appropriation bill, then the government falls. And Robinson should ensure, knowing that was the state of the parliament, to ensure that this happened. And he didn't. And if he had reconvened the government based on reconstituted government based on the alignment in parliament, that would have created exciting possibilities. I don't want to go into that as well. So I think the current constitution, the exercise, the initiative in constitution reform, is the backlash of that failed Robinson presidency. Robinson has left us in a very, very, very bad state, I think. First of all, he's soured ethnic relations. He had encouraged, his administration has allowed to, has resulted in a deepening of ethnic polarization in the country, similar to what occurred when the NR broke up in 1988. So that's one of the things, and we have to live with it. The second one is that the executive is now moving to further concentrate central power, centralized power, executive authority. And I just read Lenny saying last week that now it is clear. He said President Richards first decided he used the mechanism of delay and said he couldn't appoint a tribunal to try the Chief Justice. And his excuse was that matters were before the court and so on. And lo and behold now, he's changed that position and he's gone on. He's gone on with the Prime Minister and elected the tribunal, agreed to this election of the tribunal, like the nomination of the tribunal. He's also agreed to the suspension of the Chief Justice. So it's a fall away from that position of presidential resistance to the initiative, to the exercise of power by the executive. And you have a concentration now of power in the Prime Minister's hand. Clear. Right? And so that's on one angle. On one angle, at the level of the central government, at the level of the institution of the state, you have a centralization of power now. And at the level of the parties, you have a centralization of power. Because Pandey responds to all of that. This thing that almost led to his defeat on the appropriation bill started in his party by independent men. Men who think, men who were trying to set limits on what he can do and what Pandey can do. He couldn't bring in Richard or whoever it was as the Prime Minister virtually. He acting as President, your Prime Minister, doing all this and so on, running roughshod over the party and so on and that. And Pandey is now, he's driven from this party. And those who want to come back, he's forced them to put their tail between their legs, eat crow and come back, as Sudama and Ramesh Maharaj has done. Right? So you have that, and the PNM is the same thing. The PNM is not going to even give a chance for such a people to take place. Consolidation of maximum leadership and of executive authority, both in the institution of the state, in the government, and in the party. That is the result. If you have any revolt, and the revolt fails, then you have a backlash of restoration and repression and so on. And that's what we're witnessing now.